The 1800s, a century presented as an age of unmatched progress, moral certainty, and flawless politeness. It was the era of steam and steel, when the world was being reshaped at a breathtaking speed. We imagine gaslit streets, horse-drawn carriages, elegant ballrooms, and people fastened into stiff collars and even stiffer manners. It was a century that styled itself as the peak of civilization, a monument to order, respectability, and propriety. Yet, just beneath the gleaming surface of this gilded age lay a far darker reality. Loving someone of the same sex could lead to arrest, public disgrace, and complete erasure from history. Same-sex love was not merely considered sinful, it was criminal. So unspeakable was this crime, that newspapers often refused to print the word itself, replacing it with dashes and asterisks, as though the ink were too pure to touch the idea. This is the story of the laws that haunted these lives, the hidden worlds built for survival, and the lies forced into darkness. It is an attempt to pull back the curtain on a history never meant to be told, to uncover the whispers, codes, and quiet acts of resistance that prove that, even in the most oppressive times, love in all its forms finds a way. This is the hidden history of homosexuality in the 19th century. To understand this secret world, one must first understand the cage that confined it. The 19th century was not only an age of technological wonder, it was also a period of intense social control in Britain and the United States. A rigid Victorian morality took hold, placing public respectability above all else. The family was considered sacred and immutable, a man, a woman, and their children. Anything outside this narrow definition was viewed not just as immoral, but as a direct threat to the stability of society itself. And when morality failed to enforce conformity, the law stood ready. For centuries, a legal spectre from the Tudor era haunted England's statute books. The Buggery Act of 1533, enacted under Henry VIII. This law made sexual relations between men a capital offense, punishable by death. Though centuries old, its shadows stretched deep into the 1800s. Men were still being executed for sodomy in Britain, as late as 1835. Imagine this. In the age of Charles Dickens and the first steam locomotives, two men, James Pratt and John Smith, were hanged, not for murder or treason, but for being observed together, in a private room. Their executions marked the final deaths for sodomy in Britain, a grim milestone in a long history of persecution. In 1861, the law was revised. The Offences Against the Person Act formally abolished the death penalty for sodomy, replacing it with sentences that could extend to life imprisonment. At first glance, this appeared to be a step toward leniency. In reality, it often had the opposite effect. Many historians argue that once execution was removed from the equation, juries became far more willing to convict. The terror did not disappear. It merely changed shape from the gallows to the soul-crushing grind of hard labor in prisons such as Pentonville or Reading Jail. This legal framework was exported across the British Empire. Colonies around the world inherited these laws, laying the foundations for anti-homosexual legislation that, in some countries, still exists today. In the United States, the legal landscape varied by state, but the sentiment was the same. Drawing on English common law, states criminalized what they termed crimes against nature. Punishments ranged from long prison sentences to fines and even flogging. The objective was clear: to eradicate what was deemed a vile behavior from society. Yet the law did not act alone. It found a powerful ally in medicine. In the latter half of the century, a new idea took hold. Homosexuality was no longer just a crime or a sin, it was an illness. Psychiatrists and sexologists began pathologizing same-sex attraction, assigning it clinical-sounding labels such as sexual inversion, moral insanity, and congenital homosexuality. Influential thinkers like Richard von Croftebin classified homosexuality as a form of hereditary degeneration in his 1886 work Psychopathia Sexualist. This medical lens cut both ways. A small number of early pioneers argued that, if homosexuality was innate, it should not be criminalized. But these voices were rare. For the most part, the medical establishment handed the state a new weapon. Men and women could now be subjected to treatments ranging from hypnosis and electroshock therapy to confinement in asylums, and in extreme cases, castration. You were no longer merely a criminal. You were a patient to be cured, a defective body to be fixed or removed. The stigma became double-edged, both criminal and mentally ill. This fusion of legal danger and medical pathologization created a suffocating atmosphere of fear. An accusation, even without proof, could lead to social ruin, loss of employment, and permanent estrangement from family. And from this fear emerged a particularly vile enterprise: Blackmail. Lawyers of the era would later describe laws targeting gay men as the blackmailer's charter, a stolen letter, a whispered rumor, a moment of affection, witnessed by the wrong person. Any of these could become tools of extortion. Many chose to pay, living under constant threat, rather than risk total destruction. This was the Gilded Cage. Externally, an era of progress and moral righteousness. Internally, for those who loved beyond society's boundaries, a world of legal traps, psychological torment, and relentless fear of exposure. The question, then, is not only how they were persecuted, but how, despite everything, they managed to find one another. How did they build lives? How did they survive in a world where a single careless word could lead to prison? Communication had to go underground. Survival depended on secrecy, and secrecy required a language known only to those initiated into it. Beneath the surface of polite society existed a hidden transcript of glances, symbols, and coded phrases. This was the art of quiet resistance, desperate, subtle, and often beautiful. One of the most famous of these codes became synonymous with wit and defiance. In 1892, on the opening night of Lady Windermere's Fan, Oscar Wilde instructed his friends to wear green carnations on their lapels. It was a masterstroke of coding. Carnations were common, but a green one was artificial, unnatural, deliberately different, a quiet rebellion against nature itself. To outsiders, it was merely a flower. To those in the know, it was a signal, a badge of identity, a declaration of belonging to a shared secret world. The symbol became so recognizable that a scandalous 1894 novel, loosely inspired by Wilde and his lover, was simply titled The Green Carnation. This use of flowers drew on a broader Victorian tradition, known as floriography, the language of flowers. While polite society used it for courtship, queer communities repurposed it for subversion. Violets, for example, became associated with sapphic love, tracing back to the ancient Greek poet Sappho, who wrote of women wearing violet garlands. Rediscovered in the 19th century, the symbol offered a delicate historical nod to a love that predated Victorian repression by millennia. It was not only flowers. The aesthetic movement of the late 19th century, with its credo of art for art's sake, became fertile ground for queer expression. Its celebration of beauty, luxury, and decadence rejected the rigid industrial masculinity of the age. Symbols like the peacock feather, extravagant, unnecessary, flamboyant, were embraced as defiant markers of visibility and magnificence. Even when the meaning had to remain hidden, language itself was reshaped. In the ports and theatrical circles of London, the roots of a secret slang known as Polari began to form, drawing from Italian, Romani, backslang, and Cockney rhyming slang. Polari was the language of society's margin sailors, actors, circus performers, sex workers, and was eventually adopted enthusiastically by gay men. It allowed conversations to occur openly, yet remain incomprehensible to outsiders. A man was an Omi, a woman a Polone. To look was to vada. One could vada the bona Omi across a crowded pub, without attracting suspicion. Polari was more than a code. It was cultural glue, creating community through shared speech and turning language itself into an act of belonging. For women, the codes were often more subtle, woven into everyday social life. The 19th century saw the rise of romantic friendships, because society largely believed women lacked sexual desire. Intense emotional bonds between women were encouraged. They could write passionate letters, hold hands, share beds, and profess eternal devotion, all under the assumption that this was merely preparation for marriage to a man. This blindness offered cover. Women could live together in lifelong partnerships, known as Boston marriages, particularly among educated, financially independent new women. While society saw companionship, many of these homes were sites of deep, committed love. Letters often destroyed for safety, but sometimes surviving speak unmistakably of devotion, of my darling, of souls bound together. Because such love was deemed impossible, it was paradoxically left undisturbed, hidden in plain sight. The written word was both vital and dangerous. Letters and diaries held truth, but they were also evidence. Poetry became a powerful refuge. Writers like Walt Whitman infused their work with homoerotic energy, celebrating comradeship and the beauty of the male form. Leaves of Grass became a lifeline for readers who recognized themselves in its undercurrents of desire. Every coded phrase, every symbol, every shared space was a small victory against a system designed to isolate and erase. With these tools, a secret world took shape. The next question was where it could exist. If public spaces were dangerous, new ones had to be carved out in alleys, back rooms, and shadowed corners of growing cities. From London to New York, Paris to Berlin, a secret geography emerged. In London, remnants of 18th century molly houses lingered. Though police crackdowns made overt gathering places risky, certain pubs and coffeehouses developed clandestine reputations through word of mouth. Ordinary establishments by day, they lived double lives by night. Public parks, such as Hyde Park and St. James's Park, became meeting grounds after dark, as did certain streets and public lavatories. These spaces carried immense risk police entrapment, violence, but, for many working-class men, they were the only option. The wealthy elite had more discreet refuges, private clubs, literary societies, salons protected by class privilege. Across the Atlantic, New York's Bowery and Greenwich Village hosted masquerade balls and drag events, where gender norms were joyfully subverted. One pioneer was William Dorsey Swann, a former slave who organized drag balls in Washington, D.C., and became the first to call himself a queen of drag, enduring repeated arrests. For women, community often centered on the home and reform institutions. Settlement houses run by figures like Jane Addams herself, in a lifelong partnership with a woman, became hubs of female community and activism, sheltered by assumptions of asexual friendship. In Europe, contrasts were stark. France had decriminalized same-sex acts in 1791, making Paris a refuge for queer artists. Germany, by contrast, enacted paragraph 175 in 1871, criminalizing male homosexuality. Yet it was here that the world's first homosexual rights organization emerged. In 1897, Magnus Hirschfeld founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, advocating for repeal of paragraph 175, and arguing that homosexuality was a natural human variation. These hidden spaces were fragile. One scandal could destroy them. In 1895, that scandal arrived. Oscar Wilde's trial dragged homosexuality into public spectacle. His conviction was not merely legal, it was cultural. Fear swept through the community. Letters were burned. Silence deepened. And yet, this was not an ending. The true legacy of the 19th century is not only suffering, but resilience. To exist, to love, to create, was an act of defiance. These lives were forced into shadow, but they did not disappear. They left clues: a poem, a diary, a symbol on a lapel. This history reminds us that progress is never inevitable, and that the struggle for the freedom to love is as old as humanity itself. The voices of the 19th century may be faint, but they speak not of defeat only, of the unconquerable power of the human spirit. If you could ask one question of the people who lived this history, what would it be? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more untold histories. Your support helps keep these voices alive, ensures they are never forgotten.